foothills of California in the gold rush, all the conflict that took place. People don't really talk about this in public schools. You know, when we learn about it in elementary school, it's all about miners and their dirty beards going around painting in the river. But this place was occupied and owned before Anglo-Americans came here by Native Americans for thousands of years. And then in the span of 100 years, the landscape was changed there, moved away by any means necessary. So there's just a long history of violence here and suffering. And we just have these old buildings that contain these spirits.
My name is Emma Hampton, and I am the director for the Calaveras County Historical Society and Museums. So the Historical Society started all the way back in 1952, and that got started because most of Calaveras' history was never written down. It was just told through stories and family histories, like kind of passed down through the generations. And through that, we've been able to continue with our mission statement, which is to preserve for posterity the history of Calaveras County. The three buildings for this complex just downtown, the oldest one that we have use of is the Oddfellows Hall. That was built in 1854. And that one, we only use the top of. The Arts Gallery has the bottom. And that one we were able to extend further into our museum. Right now it holds kind of a mix of different artifacts from people who donated that lived in the county. And then the one we're currently in, the jail, right above us is the old courthouse, and that was built in 1867. The jail and the courthouse were used until, I think, 1964, so it was used for almost 100 years. The courtroom will still get used occasionally. It hasn't been in the last few years, but it's still there for like an overflow for the current courthouse at Government Center. And then the Hall of Records, where you guys first come in for the entryway, that was built in 1893. That one was built quite a few years after the courthouse. It was essentially built just to store records. And eventually, as the need got bigger, it also housed the auditors and the tax office, the archives. Like, it's been quite a few things in its history. To be honest, we don't really tell people that it's haunted until they come up to us and be like, hey, this is what I experienced. Is this place really haunted? Then we'll, of course, go into all of our stories and everything. But a couple times we've had people be like, this place isn't really that haunted. And it's just like, okay. That's what you think. You're here maybe once or twice. For all of us that are here every single day, it's a totally different story, but also it's like, no, you didn't experience anything that day. That's fine.
My name is Z Harmon. I am an office and research assistant here. We've got several areas specific in our museum that are, I think, more haunted than others. The room that we're in right now, of course, the judges' chambers are one of those hot spots. The Comanche Church is another hot spot, and the jail yard.
The jail is the most active. I've had this iron door slam shut several times on me.
The jail yard includes both the jail proper, which is actually part of the courthouse building, but it also includes what used to be a forensic analysis hut back in the 30s and 40s. Where they did like fingerprints and crime scene photos developing and things like that. But the building that's right next to that is what we call the women's jail. We don't really know for sure, because there are conflicting accounts from various different people of whether it was a women's jail or if it held the mentally ill and juveniles. That specific area, the women's jail, is a place that we don't currently have open for the museum for visitors to come through. But we, as staff members, have gone through that space several times, and my male coworkers never ever have an issue in there. But myself and two of my other female coworkers have had experiences in there where one of them won't go back in there at all. I've had experiences in there where I will go in, and as soon as I step through the threshold, like, I get a headache and my chest starts to get a little tight and it's hard to breathe. But then the second I step out of the building, it's fine. It's a really interesting place because we don't know if it was the women's jail or if it was for the mentally ill and juvenile. But either way, women have experiences in there.
With all of the research that we do just on our own, or for the research requests that we have come in from the public, we get to delve into a lot of different stories that may have been forgotten, or we haven't talked about in a while, or we just didn't know. One of the ones we're working on right now, which was brought to light by trying to revamp some of our school tours, is the murder of Deputy James Casey that occurred out in the jail yard in 1903. He was murdered with 2 gunshot wounds to the abdomen. Going through the different newspaper clippings and our different Las Calaveras and different, like the different perspectives from those that were witnesses during the trial, the agreed upon place was that James Casey was murdered in what we know as our women's jail. We found that building had moved a couple of times within the jail yard, and at that point it was about in the corner, the east corner of our jail yard, which is where Casey was said to have been. It was also known as the dark hole, which is where they would just kind of put the drunk people. So we have a pretty good feeling that that's about where he was when he died.
We do have 2 or 3 bodies buried in the jail yard that we actually don't know where they're buried at because so much time has passed, but we do know they're there. We know that there was a dungeon, for lack of a better word, in the jail yard that was built by one of the previous sheriffs, where they would essentially put prisoners for isolation. So you couldn't stand up, you could hardly sit, you were mostly laying or sitting down, and it was pitch black. There were no windows, no doors, anything. So once you were in there, you were stuck there until somebody got you out, and you were just there in the dark by yourself. Those energies from the time when this was a very active jail center kind of linger in the jail yard. There are times when I go out to water the plants out there when I will see something out of the corner of my eye and I think somebody's coming through the museum, and I turn and look and there's nobody there. And I go through the front and I say, hey, is there somebody walking around? And Emma will tell me, no, nobody here. And so I will definitely see things in the jail yard pretty often.
We're not sure how many people were actually sent to the gallows. We don't have the prison records for that. But there were, in this whole, almost 100 years, there were probably a couple thousand that were here in the jail. In 1888, that was the last hanging in Calaveras County, and that was George Cox.
San Andreas, July 6, 1888. My dear daughter, I am very hopeful for a new consider in life, but think it is with no effect all you are doing for me will prove worthless to me. I came home to see my children, and by doing so, I walk in my grave. I am filling the position I was born to fill, and think no more about dying than going to sleep. Everybody has got to pull over the same hill to meet in Death Valley. I am on the fence and can fall 2 different ways. I wish you all success in life, hoping you and your husband may see many happy days. There is no change in my feelings, my constitution has been case-handed to the capacity of steel by a band of dishonest men. I could write you a great many things. I don't fear death, but I have been abused from my birth to the present day. Tell Mr. Damon to come down. Yours affectionately, G.W. Cox.
George Cox, being the last person hanged just in the jail yard in the corner over there, he had some delusions. He ended up shooting his son-in-law at the dinner table because he thought that he was sleeping with George's wife, and then obviously was sentenced to first-degree murder and was hanged in the jail yard. And he chose, because most of the prisoners that were hanged were offered, like, what do you want to wear to die in? And he chose a chainmail shirt, which we do have on display. And yeah, he was executed in the corner. It was a big deal. Most of the executions were you had to have a ticket, and they would build up the walls on either side of the scaffolding. So if you didn't have a ticket, you couldn't see it.
Ben Thorne is definitely, I guess you could say he's kind of a celebrity in Calaveras County lore. He was the sheriff that was responsible for bringing Black Bart in. He was very prominent. He was very well known as well.
Sheriff Thorne had the reputation of being down to business. There were some things that we have heard about his reign as sheriff that weren't great. He wasn't really a great man from what we've been able to figure out with just how he treated the prisoners. He's just kind of my least favorite. He'll slam this door, he'll slam one of the jail cell doors. He'll also kind of slam this door. When we go to lock it up, we'll feel a push.
Was locking up one day and I was looking for the right key after I had pulled the door almost completely shut, but there was still about a couple inch gap between the door jamb and the door. I was looking for the right key and all of a sudden the door just slams all the way shut. And the door is one of those things that has a knob, but it doesn't latch until you lock it. But when I went to go push it open, it wouldn't push open. I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna lock the door and go on my merry way.
So my name is Theodore Rossier. I started working here back in, I believe, August of 2021. This was during COVID. And at first I worked in the Red Bar Museum up the road for a few months, and then they switched me over to the downtown museum. And it's a small museum. We all wear a lot of hats here. So within the first few weeks of me working here, Christopher and I were up here. He was in the closet, sifting through some boxes, and I was in the door frame, looking in, watching him. He turns to me to say something, and his face turns white. And he has a look of terror on his face, and he's looking right behind me. He holds this expression for a few seconds, and then he says, "Hold on, just let me collect myself for a few moments." And then he later explains to me that he saw a figure behind me, a shadow of a tall man wearing a top hat. And it made me feel pretty weird because this was my first couple weeks working here and something already happened to me. And he even told me he was afraid that I would quit after that. People who donate something either like their father or their great-grandfather or grandfather had, and they're entrusting you with that object to store, take good care of, display it with their permission, and that sort of thing. And I've seen some emotional reactions, not in terms of donating, but in terms of family research that we do here as well, where it'll be like a little grandma in her 90s and she'll see a photograph of her great-grandfather here and she'll break down crying.
I think one of the strangest items we have on display here at the museum is probably going to be in our death and dying case right here on the top level of the courthouse. It's got several post-mortem photos that were really popular during the Victorian era. We've got a handful, most of them are of small children because the child mortality rate was so high during the gold rush. But we also have a handful of adult postmortem pictures, which are a little bit rarer in our collection. So those are pretty interesting to look at, and just remember that, wow, those people are not living, even though they might look like it in the picture. And we also, in that same case, have Victorian hair work, which is made with human hair. And it's a gorgeous piece. It looks like it could have been embroidered with lace and beads and all these things, but it's actually made out of human hair, and it was a practice that was commonly done because they didn't have cameras as prevalent as we do now. So in an effort to have that one last piece of their loved one, they would make hair work, and that was their last personal effect of a loved one.
We just got a recent donation that was a doll, a painting, and some other family memorabilia. And immediately, it wasn't like a bad feeling, but it was immediately like a feeling of, okay, something's a little off. And we did find out as we were taking apart the painting and cleaning it, there was a Ouija board attached to it. And the doll moved when we found that. So it wasn't like a bad feeling, but it was more or less of a, you found it kind of a feeling. So that one is the more recent that we've encountered.
The wedding dress that's in the bottom level of the courthouse belonged to a woman named Minerva Reed. It's a beautiful dress, and we think that she thinks so too, and she comes to visit us and tell us how beautiful it is, because we have experienced it, as well as patrons in the museum have seen her sleeve move.
So Minerva, she lived a very long life. She died at 103, and she was born up in, I believe, Sheep Ranch. She lived in West Point, and she taught in all of the schools in West Point, Railroad, Sheep Ranch, Murphy's, San Andreas, all the way down to Stockton. And so she did that for most of her life.
But when she passed away, we got a lot of her stuff in our donations. And her wedding dress has been on display for as long as I know.
I believe she ended up passing it down to her niece to get married in, and then it found its way here. But we do still have several members of that family that still come through and come and see her dress and everything. And then, yeah, there's occasions that when she decides that she wants to put it on, her left sleeve will move.
There have been times where patrons will come running back into the office and saying, oh my gosh, the dress moved, like the arm moved, I saw it. And they'll tell us, well, they were coming down the spiral staircase where nobody else was in the bottom level, and from the staircase, nowhere near the dress, they saw the arm move up and the arm go back down.
She's very, very chill. She is not a fan of dogs that we let come into the museum. Occasionally, she's not a fan, so the dogs will start barking right when they get downstairs. She loves kids. The last few times we've had kids that have been able to see a ghost, it's typically been Minerva. And she just kind of pops in just to say hey. She'll check in on us if we're the only ones here. So she's my favorite. We have on her case, when I started, it just talked about her dress. Mentioned her name, when she got married, and her dress. And so I did a little bit more research, and I was like, oh, well, she was actually really cool. And so I had this whole thing written up. I had a picture of her and her husband with her in her wedding dress and everything. And I put it all up, and I told her, I was like, hey, I think you're really cool. I'm going to do this. And I put it up there, and I was like, basically, if you don't like this, just let me know. Well, she did about 10 minutes later. And we hear a loud crash, and Minerva's dress is on this side by the doors. There's also the staircase that's over here. when I went to go see what had happened, the picture that was on her case was across the room, shattered on the floor. So picked it up and I told our former director, Christopher, and I was like, so I don't know what to do with this now. And so we waited a day and we thought about it and we're like, I wonder if it was a picture. So we changed the picture to her and her sister and it's been fine.
I think the thing that attracts spirits to any specific object is personal relevance. In the case of the wedding dress, that was probably one of the most special days of her life. And she spent an amount of money that, I don't even think can fathom because of inflation. But for them in those days, even $100 would have been an exorbitant amount of money to spend on a wedding dress that you wear one time. And it's gorgeous. It's silk, it's embroidered, it's lace, it's high-necked, it's bustled, it's a gorgeous dress. And it was a significant event in her life. The judge's chambers is kind of the same thing. Even if it's not Judge Gotshock, any of the ghosts that reside in this room could theoretically be a judge, and it would make sense because this is where they would go between cases. This is where they would study law, and this is where they would spend a lot of their time. It was a very important place during their careers. This desk was Judge Gotshock's. He was the judge in Calaveras for quite a long time. He was a very well-respected community member, very kind, was very generous, very giving, very fair, which was something that was pretty rare during the Gold Rush days. I believe he was in his 70s when he passed away. He was starting to lose his vision and starting to lose his hearing, and he had a very young wife. She, I believe, was only in her 30s at the time. So he felt, because of his growing disabilities, that he was becoming a burden to her, that she was going to have to take care of him for the rest of his life and a majority of her life. And to alleviate that stress on her, he actually had a law office across the street. And in his law office one day, his apartment neighbor, who was another lawyer at the time, heard a gunshot and went to go investigate, and they found his body. He had shot himself to alleviate the stress from his wife. He left a note that said, "I'm so sorry, but I don't want this for you, you know?" So this allegedly is the desk that he did this in. I think that he definitely haunts this room because we have so much of his memorabilia here. I will come in and lock up and turn the lights off and everything, and then the next morning I'll come in and that door is wide open. There have been times where this chair is pushed up against the desk and we leave and come back the next morning and the chair is knocked over or pushed back. So nothing super tangible in person in the moment, but things will be misplaced when we come back, and there's not been anybody here since then.
I'm not sure if it's the objects themselves or the theme of the display. I think there's just some spirits in here that don't like things being moved around. I think they like it as is. So whenever a display is circulated or objects are moved, sometimes things can happen.
I was closing up one night and as we do, we say goodnight, we say good morning when we open and close. And so I said, okay, good night. And I started to turn off the lights and I just hear this deep man's voice be like, "Excuse me?" And I turn around thinking it was so clear that it sounded like there was an actual guest in that room. And I turned around, there was nobody there. I screamed, quickly closed the rest of the museum and went home. The ghost that is in the Oddfellows Hall in the barber chair, he shows up occasionally, and it's usually out of the corner of your eye. So when you go to turn around, you'll see the flash of a man with like a cowboy hat and a mustache, so the stereotypical for the time, just sitting in the barber chair. Doesn't really do much, but he'll be there occasionally. We've had several objects that when we have an idea that something might be attached to it, And if we put it somewhere, it'll knock itself off the shelf. It'll maybe throw their picture. It'll do something reoccurring enough that we kind of will clue in and be like, oh, maybe we don't put that there. So, and it can be like an actual object. We've found the pictures in our stairwell that we put up honoring different past residents. Kind of depending on where they were placed, they would fall off. No matter how much stuff we put on the back of them, they'll just fall. So we ended up rearranging a lot of them and they've stayed in place. So even something is like not physically something that belonged to that person, they'll let you know if it's in the wrong spot.
When I first started working here, this must have been like a month or so afterwards, Christopher had a job for me, which was going around the building and seeing which key goes where, because at the time we just had a big bucket of keys with no label. The people who made that bucket have long since gone, so we didn't know what the keys went to. So he had me walk around, just going through every lock and seeing which key goes where. And when I was walking through this room, I just felt something, just like eyes piercing through me, just in the stomach and in the heart, just like a heavy feeling. And it just came out of nowhere because I'd been walking around for like a few hours just doing the keys. And then suddenly I felt it. And I kind of shook it off like, oh, just get through it. Because I knew the place had some spirits. So I was like, oh, it's that, just go through it, do your job. And then I believe a week or so later, only then did I realize that there were these pictures on the wall with them staring at you.
The staircase in the bottom level of the courthouse, it's a gorgeous spiral staircase. It's something that when people come in, that's the first thing they see, and they always comment, oh, how beautiful. I can just imagine the people walking down in their beautiful dresses and suits and everything like that. And I was in that same camp, like, what a beautiful spiral staircase. You never get to see those anymore. But I noticed very quickly after I started working here that there's something not quite right about the staircase. There have been times when I've been walking down the staircase, especially, but it has happened when I'm walking up the staircase where all of a sudden I just get so dizzy and my head starts to swim a little bit, and my vision doesn't go black or anything, but it is pretty disorienting, almost like a sense of vertigo. And it feels like I'm kind of suspended almost while I'm walking, like my head is just not there. And we've had several people come into the museum, see the staircase, go, oh, how beautiful, and then avoid it at all costs because there's just something about it that is strange.
I believe this was one day over the weekend. I used to work here on the weekends by myself, and it was in the bookstore, and I was sitting there doing, my job, and I look over at our security TV camera, and not the camera, sorry, the footage, and in one of the panels with the camera pointing towards the front door, I just see something moving around. So I stand up and I kind of get closer to the camera, and I just see it just moving, just floating around. And it wasn't a glare from the TV because in the footage you see I wasn't moving, the camera isn't moving, it's just there and the orb is moving around. And the whole time, because the TV's next to the door, I'm just like trying to see if I can see anything. But no, I couldn't see anything just on this surveillance footage.
The Hall of Records, before it was built, was just an empty courtyard in front of the courthouse. And that is actually where they used to have hangings, public hangings, when they were still doing that. So that is kind of the energy that's attached here, and then between that and the energy of the jail. And this was a place where people were experiencing some of the worst things that were ever happening to them, from crime to the loss of a loved one or whatever it was that made them come to the court. They were going through hard times, and I think that kind of energy lingers.